driver's license, but because they're scared of the police officer, because they know how those interactions are. And because they feel like they are less than the police officer because of how interactions have been. And when I addressed this with the police officer, he really didn't have any answers for me. I asked him, do you feel like the Dover community is comfortable with you, with this police force? And he really didn't have anything to say to me about their approach in policing. And I was kind of upset about that because I want my community to feel safe with their police officers. And this is such a national issue that we're having. How do we help this interaction with community members and the police? And that's why we're hearing about all these cases. So that's just something I wanted to share.
I'm thinking of two stories. I'm trying to pick one. A couple of Synod Commission meetings ago. Synod Commission is the body where presbyteries send the representatives to do work on behalf of the Assembly, or the Synod Assembly, in its absence. And it was right after the General Assembly, and I don't think, as a matter of fact, you're going to be talking about a lot of the amendments that have come down from the General Assembly for presbytery vote, discussion. And I'm hoping this doesn't sway in any way your opinion that you may have about anything. But in any case, we're having a discussion about an organization that had come to the Synod for some help, and the purpose of this organization is to walk with and encourage gay and lesbian, LGBTQ candidates for ministry in the discernment, even as our church is in discernment and transition in that part of our life. We did the committee that was looking at that before it went to the floor of the commission. Everybody seemed to be fine with providing whatever they were asking for. But in that committee, the representative from Eastern Korean Presbytery was sitting. We are one of two synods that have a non-geographical Korean presbytery, and most of the reason for that is because of language barriers, but there is certainly more than language to the significant Korean presence that we have in this part of the country within our church. And the person said, you know what, she asked some historical questions about the synod's engagement with this organization. Questions were answered, and she said, you know what, in principle, I don't disagree. If you guys want to do it, that's fine. I'll raise my vote however I think it is. There was a majority and it was going to pass within commission and within the committee. What I am concerned is that the Synod Commission is taking this vote now, right after the vote that came out of the General Assembly. And the decision of the General Assembly it pains Eastern Koreans. We are in the process as a presbytery that is conservative, and I think we will know this, that is conservative, trying to figure out what does that mean for us. We love this church. We love the history that this church represents for the development of Protestantism, Christianity, and Presbyterianism in Korea. But we need time to figure this out. And if a decision comes right after GA from the Synod that may be construed as, we're moving forward with this, whether you like it or not, kind of thing, it's going to, be further problems to the conversations that we're trying to engage within Eastern Korea. The reaction to that, she was one of two non-white members of a 7-member committee. The reaction of the white members of the committee, who turned to lean center or left in the theological spectrum, was that, yeah, but we have, they have been struggling with this for 30 years, and we all know the history that some LGBTQ activists, and supporters do about the, long-standing struggle about this, which is true, right? It's just time to be prophetic and blah, blah, like this. It's a time, to stand up to conservative. to what I had to start the conversation and say, you know, we need to hold on a minute, because we are listening to Eastern Koreans' concern about the statement that this will make to them on behalf of the Synod, as if we were talking to white conservatives. In this white fight that has been going on within the denomination about LGBTQ rights, between that has been articulated by white liberals and white conservatives, right? Although Koreans overall, and this is true for Latinos, tend to be conservative in the theological spectrum, it is not a white conservative argument that they're doing. There's also deep historical and cultural aspects of the way they're reading this issue. They are not asking for this not to pass. They are asking for them to have the time to do the appropriate and necessary, not only theological, but also historical and cultural translations that need to happen for them to figure out where it is that they're at within this church, that they understand has informed their way of being as Presbyterians, and all of a sudden this historical foundation that they have understood Presbyterianism has been all of a sudden in their minds pulled out of there from under the feet. Right? So this is not a theological argument only that they're having. There is deep historical and cultural. I'm sharing this because in race and intercultural relations, we're talking about conversation. In Spanish, I've been sharing this with everybody that I go to. So in Spanish, also in English, but I think in Spanish is more poignant. There's a difference between the term dialogue, and the term conversation, conversación. In Spanish, dialogue pretends that in the dialogue, one party is going to convince the other or other parties of his or her point of view. And that's the end of the dialogue. In conversation in Spanish, which has the same root as the word convivir, to live together, right? The object of the conversation, of the conversación, is not to convince anybody. It's to live together. And in that living together, spaces of convergence will become apparent. But the end purpose of the conversación, of the conversation, is not to convince or move us forward, which is what a lot are pushing for. We need too much forward on the LGBTQ thing, we need too much forward on the black thing, we need to move forward on the race thing. We need to live together because we are all translating this issue. Not only in political and social terms, but also in theological and cultural and historical and personal lenses. So in living together, in listening to each other, those places that will become apparent. Eastern Korean is not asking for a no vote. Well, they might be asking that at the end. If we use the process that we usually use to make decisions. But what is more, what non-white, in the LGBTQ issue, for instance, what non-white groups within our church are asking for is time for them to literally translate what's going on, because they love this church. It is interesting that the many other groups that are leaving our denomination are white. Non-white groups, as conservative as they might be, you know, are holding the fort. You know, we are PCUSA, and this is not where we thought we wanted to be, but we need to figure it out. We're not just going to run out, right? But it's in conversation, that this will happen, so that we can then be transformed by the stories of others, and then become this new thing, this beloved community, right? That we're asked and challenged to become.
Thank you very much. In fact, that's where we'd like to. You just segued for us to move into hearing some more thoughts on how can we help make change happen. Now, obviously, these are committed people. They're here on a Saturday. They're committed people. Sometimes we don't like to admit how powerful white privilege is in our lives. It's hard for us to admit. So we still struggle with that. But I think we're open. We want to keep keep hearing, just like, wow, that's powerful to be together. But what other suggestions would you have, maybe more philosophical or very practical for what we can do to help in this area? Jackie?
Well, I just wanted to start by saying that, in my opinion, it all starts at home, right? It all starts on how we are, well, I don't have children, but if I did have children, how we are helping our children grow up, what their perspectives are, because a lot of times our children's perspectives are the perspectives of their parents, right? And our children are the adults of tomorrow, and so we really need to make sure that it starts at home, knowing that we are all equal, and talking about these issues, being able to talk about what's happening with Ferguson, being able to talk about what's happening around the world, and just being able to let our children know that we are very culturally diverse, and we may not all look the same, but that doesn't mean we don't have to treat each other equally. So I think practically, that's where it all starts. It all starts with our parents, but also in other ways, like for example, something that Wind of the Spirit is very strong about is going into churches and doing educational presentations to non-immigrant communities, because sometimes other groups don't realize the struggles that immigrants encounter and face. They don't know what that's like, and so it's good to bring awareness to everyone, to non-immigrant communities, of what these challenges look like and how you can help, right? Because we're talking about being a voice, and there are ways practically to help these communities, racism, and be a voice for those people. So many times we see things that happen, for example, with Ferguson, Eric Brown, and everyone you see supporting our minority groups, right? But it's so much more powerful to see a diverse group of people helping with an issue, and not only the representatives of that group. So I think that's something that's impactful.
Sure. Harriet Tubman is famous for a quote saying, "She could have freed more slaves if they knew they were slaves." More white people could be free of white privilege if they knew it wasn't a privilege. Toni Morrison did an interview with, I think it's Daniel Rose. Is it Daniel Rose? The guy that does those interviews with the black screen. Charlie Rose. And I was listening to the interview, and Charlie Rose, kind of like this conversation, really kind of wanted to understand, the black experience. And Toni Morrison really, I thought, sort of turned the table to really help white Americans understand race. We've all been fooled. We've all been fooled. And so if we want to free ourselves of this sort of racial stigma, we have to deconstruct the context of race. It is a false construct. It was born in the heart of evil. No one came here from Europe calling themselves white. Maybe you came here calling yourself German or Irish or something like that, but white was something given to sort of create this sort of false sense of privilege. It's false. It's not real. And it was given to make poor white immigrants feel, poor European immigrants feel, they were equal to the landowners and the billionaires by simply sharing skin color. It's a trick. It's false. And if you really spend time in some of the sort of upper class, quote unquote, Protestant circles, you'll find out, or you can read Digby Botzell, who talks about, Anglo-Saxon culture. There are some people who aren't white enough. And now we see on social media, thank God for Jerry Springer, not everybody meets the criteria of being blonde and wearing a size 2 or a size 0 and being this great housewife and cook and going to an Ivy League school. It's false. It's not real. White people hurt like black people. And in the black community, it's also a false construction of race, right? There's some people who aren't black enough. Barack Obama's not black enough because his mom is white. These are false constructs, and they're false arguments. And so if you want to be healed and delivered, you have to sort of free yourself from them. And no one, as Bonhoeffer said, can give you that freedom. But Toni Morrison said to Charlie Rose, what happens if you're not white? If you take that off and that's no longer an attribute, if it means nothing to you, what are you? And I hope as Christians we can say we're Christians. They won't know me by my skin color or where I went to school or my religious status or my zip code, but they'll know us by our love. Because when these bodies die, there are no white Christians in heaven, there are no black Christians in heaven. It's our souls that God looks at. And so what does your soul look like? Because you can't say, well, I'm a white soul or I'm a black soul. Right? God examines our heart. And so what I try to do as a pastor of a predominantly African-American congregation is remind people there's no such thing as black. It does not exist. People want black unity. There will never be black unity because black doesn't exist. There will never be white unity because it does not exist. But there can be Christian unity. And so I think, how do we get free? We lived in South Africa. We saw the results of the end of apartheid. People are still oppressed. People are still in bondage. Afrikaners, the coloreds, and the Africans are still oppressed. If anybody's free in that country, it's the indigenous Africans. Because they're clear about their identity. And it's not black, it's not color, it's not Africana, it's not white, but it's Zulu or Xhosa, right? And so our challenge is, who are we? What are we? Who are we in Christ? And that work is something we do by ourselves. I've learned, my wife is in El Salvador right now, there's so much diversity, I don't even know what to say anymore. Do I say Hispanic? Do I say Latino? What do you say? Because somebody from Colombia sees the world differently than somebody from Mexico, different from Puerto Rico, different from Guatemala. The language is not even the same. People from Spain don't even relate to people from South America, Central America. They're like, oh, that's not us. And so, and then last night, there were people talking about, oh, Africa's a great country. No, it's not. It's a continent. When I lived in Africa, I was telling people I'm African American. Are you really? What tribe are you from? What's your native language? So I can't even say African American. I can say I'm an American. I can say I'm Christian. But we really have to get rid of these labels that have trapped us and imprisoned us. And so I don't know what white privilege is, because it's not a privilege. It's a sin. It's a lie. It's a false label. It's like when you go to Century 21, somebody told me you're actually not buying these high name brand prices. But they actually have now manufacturers that make products that are inferior to the product you could have bought at Nordstrom, but they put the same label on it. And you think you've gotten the deal, when in actual fact you've got an inferior product to what you would have paid for. There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So I hope I didn't burst anybody's bubble, but keep shopping at Century 21. But if you really want the name brand product, you've got to pay the price for it, right? So.
Tomorrow's New Testament reading is in Acts, and it's a story that after a whole bunch of trips, Paul finds Apollos, and Apollos goes somewhere else, and he stays in Ephesus and meets with these folks, you know, that sound like Christian, worship like Christian, talk like Christian, but there's something missing about them. And Paul asks the question. He asks a question. What was your baptism by, for, or what was John's baptism? Oh, fantastic, then I know how to relate to you now. Yeah. It's fine, but you're missing something, and then we all know the rest of the story, right? And I'm preaching on that text tomorrow to your sister and my sister and brothers in Forest Hills, Queens, New York tomorrow. And that's what I'm trying to do. Just ask the question, ask a question. If in your neighborhood, where you live, where you worship, and or where you work, there is a restaurant of a cuisine you're not familiar with, so a restaurant other than a diner, we're in New Jersey, right? If there's a restaurant, if there's a restaurant other than a diner, or a steakhouse, or whatever local thing your hamlet or village or town has identified to be, right? Most likely, that population is already settled there. It's not settling, it's not getting there, it's already settled there. The only reason anybody would literally put shop, build shop anywhere is because they're staying. Right? Ask the question. Who are you? Where are you from? What brought you here? How long have you been here? Have you been to church? Do you worship in our tradition? Do you worship something else? Do you worship nothing? Ask the question. What do you do for 4th of July? Probably they do nothing on 4th of July because it might not mean anything to them. Right? What do you do? Right? Ask the question. Converse. Right? And it might not bring them to church. Many of us were taught, were trained, and lived in traditions where you literally built a building, somewhere that people may see it, and people would come. That time has long passed, and I hope that we're all aware of that. Although many of us still operate like we're not aware of it. I include myself in that, right? That time has passed, and also the time where a lot of the people that are labeled Christians come to worship. Yet, the worshipful presence of the church is still needed each and everywhere Presbyterians in Newton Presbytery are found. Right? But not only on Sunday morning, but in everywhere we're at and everything we do. And a way to live that worshipful presence and witness is asking questions. It might be that in asking those questions, we will be able to witness the gospel. And the Holy Spirit will pour out not only on them, but perhaps even on us.
We have a few minutes before lunch at 12:30, so we just want to open up and see if maybe there are a couple questions that folks have been forming as they've been listening, and thank you all very much. I really appreciate what you've had to share with us. I think we're going to eat lunch 12:30 no matter what, so if you don't ask any questions, that doesn't mean you get to go sooner. But yes.
Yes.
It is on. It is on.
Yes. I only had one good year, so I might have missed a lot of things, but just I'm concerned about current events. With all the violence and economic and religious unrest going on in today's world, ISIS, Israel, Syria, recent events in France. I just wonder how should we, I would appreciate your thoughts on how we should start trying to keep an open mind on all these events, particularly how they relate to us here in northwestern New Jersey. It's tough when you see big beheadings on the news, okay? I can be able to climb it up to that point, but when you start getting people's heads cut off, it's tough. So anyway, I appreciate your thoughts.
The violence that many of our communities have suffered did not start with the beheading of a white journalist, by ISIS. We have been suffering violence and worse than beheadings. Not only blacks in the United States, but many non-principal political players. I'm trying to, broaden as much as I can, right? In the United States, right? I'm not saying we should not be moved and hurt by that. There's a long history of that, and the problem is, which is my thing with Israel and Palestine. We have moved beyond the question, who threw the first stone. Stones have been thrown all over the place, right? So that's that. Let me suggest a reading that I've been doing. It's an old book, and coming from Princeton, where you were taught that you should not do research with books older than 10 years. It is really hard to. Thank you. Unless it's Scully, that's right, thank you.
still
Right,
there?
that's right. Or Bart, good Lord. Yes. Miroslav Volf, he's a Baptist theologian, published a book, I want to say in '96, Exclusion and Embrace.
Yes.
Exclusion and Embrace. He went back to his former, to his home. So for him, ethnically, nationally I should say, he was Yugoslavian, came to the States, right? When he went back, the country he called home did not exist, right? The Balkans thing erupted and, all hell broke loose in that part of the world, and we all know, the history, right? If not, just do a quick Google search and you'll see. He went back home, what he calls home, right? To seek to understand from another lens the challenge of ethnic and interreligious engagement. Because as big a country as the United States is, and I'm talking as one born in an island, as big as this country is, for many of us, we're so isolated from the rest of the world, one, and two, think that the issues are only here. Luis Rivera Pagan, who was a professor of ecumenics and missions at Princeton Seminary, told Cornel West that as great as his stuff is, he might be perpetuating a piano syndrome, what he calls the piano syndrome in the United States, by which Luis Rivera Pagan means that the interracial issues in the United States is a black and white issue. It's not, and it's never been, only between blacks and whites, right? There were people here when the first Europeans arrived. Africans were not here, they were forcibly brought over, right? And half of our country wasn't even settled by us, by people who are lighter skinned from Western Europe, right? There were people that spoke a whole different language from a whole different part of Europe that had been here for about 300 years before this country became what we became, right? The border crossed them over. They're not crossed, you don't want to go, right? It is a very complex, all this to say that it is a very complex issue. And for me, the best way to begin is through me, right? To confess, how do I self-identify? What does it mean for a Maori to say that I am a new Presbyterian? I did not come from this tradition to be a Christian. What does it mean for me to say that I am a new Presbyterian, working in council, Puerto Rican, studied at Princeton? What does all that mean in my engagement with a black pastor of an MA church from Morristown that was actually founded by black Presbyterians? Right? What does that mean? Who lived in Africa? What does that mean? Right? We cannot negate our histories, but we can begin adding lenses to interpreting those histories. Right? For me, it's been very useful rereading Exclusion and Embrace, because it allows me to see this very complex and difficult issue of inter-ethnic, intercultural, interreligious, interracial relations from a whole different lens than what we are sucked into in this country. Yet, it's a reality throughout the world. And as Presbyterians and as Christians, we are called to give witness against those exclusions that happened. Right? And even called to embrace, in the words of Miroslav Volf, those who killed those who I identify with. It made news, the beheading of this newscaster, of this journalist by ISIS, But it is the same people that are also persecuting, killing, and destroying the spaces of people that we call Arabs, but they identify as something else. Christians who have